Flight 218 was shaking through turbulence when Marcus Reed unbuckled his belt and moved toward the overhead bin. He kept saying his daughter could not breathe. 4 years earlier, he had heard his wife say almost the same thing, and he had believed the people in white coats knew better than he did. Claire Whitmore blocked him. When Marcus reached for the red medical bag, she slapped him across the face. 2 minutes later, Nia collapsed into her seat. Dr. Elena Reyes took an epinephrine pen from that red bag, drove it into the girl's thigh, and turned to Claire. He wasn't being difficult. He was trying to save his child. The cabin went silent, but Claire had already filed her report. 3 hours before any of that, Marcus Reed stood at the gate counter in Atlanta and told a woman in an Altura air vest something nobody had asked him to say. "My daughter has a severe tree nut allergy, anaphylactic. I'm telling you now so it's in the system before we board." The agent's fingers moved over her keyboard. Marcus set a laminated card on the counter, the kind hospitals print with Nia's name and weight and the name of the medication she carried. He did not slide it toward the agent or tap it. He simply put it where she could see it and left his hands flat on either side of it open still. "It's noted," the agent said. "There's a flag on the manifest." "What does the flag look like?" She turned the monitor a few degrees. On the seat map next to 18A, there was a small blue symbol about the size of a grain of rice. Marcus looked at it a moment longer than the agent expected. Then he said, "Thank you," picked up the card, and walked back to the row of chairs where his daughter was folding a paper airplane out of the competition flyer. Nia Reed was 9 years old and built things. That was the shortest true description of her. She had come in second in her region with a device no bigger than a deck of cards. A little box that a teacher could clip to a lanyard wired to a light that would not stop blinking until somebody pressed the button on the front. The idea was simple in the way children's ideas are sometimes brutally simple. She had noticed that when a kid in her class started reacting to something, the adults spent the first 90 seconds asking each other whether anything was actually wrong. The finals were in Seattle. That was why they were flying. "Did you tell them?" Nia asked, without looking up from the wing she was creasing. "I told them." "You always tell them." "I always tell them," Marcus agreed and sat down. He was 39 and large in a way he had spent most of his adult life apologizing for without ever saying the word sorry. He kept his voice low. He kept his hands where people could see them. When he entered a room, he located the exits before he located a chair, and he did it so automatically that he had stopped noticing he did it. In the outside pocket of his carry-on was a red medical bag, and inside the red bag were 2 epinephrine auto-injectors and antihistamine, a copy of Nia's action plan, and a folded page listing every ingredient she could not have. 2 injectors, not 1. Nia had asked him about that once, why he carried a spare when the school nurse only kept 1, and Marcus had told her it was because things break. That was true. It was not the reason. The reason was Amara. For 8 months, his wife had said there was something wrong. She said it in the kitchen, and she said it in the car, and eventually she said it in a series of examination rooms to people who wrote things down without looking up. She was tired. She was losing weight. Something in her back hurt in a way that did not move when she moved. She was 34, and she had a young daughter, and she was told, in various professional arrangements of the same sentence, that she was under a lot of stress. Marcus had been in those rooms. He had sat in the chair by the door with his hands on his knees, and he had let the professionals speak because that was what you did. And because the alternative was to become the kind of husband a nurse makes a note about. By the time somebody actually looked, there was nothing left to decide except how much time was left. He kept her folder. 4 years later, it was still in the closet, thick as a phone book, every appointment, every note, every date. He had never read it again. He had also never once considered throwing it away. What survived of Amara in the house was mostly language. When Nia woke up scared, Marcus said the words his wife used to say, and he said them in her cadence because he had never found a better way. "Look at me and breathe with me." Nia did not remember her mother. She remembered the sentence. The flight was 3 hours late out of Atlanta. Weather in the corridor north, a ground stop, then a slow unwinding of it. By the time the crew of 218 came up the jetway, They had been on duty long enough that the delay had stopped being weather and started being a number attached to their names. Claire Whitmore had been flying for 17 years and had been written up 11 days earlier for closing a door 4 minutes past schedule. The write-up was one paragraph. It used the phrase failure to maintain cabin readiness, and Claire had read it enough times to hear it in her own voice. She was good at her job in the way people are good at jobs they have done for a very long time. She could read a boarding cabin in 3 seconds and tell you which row was going to be a problem. She believed that this was observation. It had been years since anyone had given her a reason to test that. Maya Brennan had been flying for 14 months. On the tablet at the forward galley, she saw the medical flag next to 18A, and she did what she had started doing after an incident in her 4th month when a supervisor asked her to account for something she had no proof of. She took out her phone and photographed the screen. It was not courage. It was the opposite of courage. It was a young woman assembling a small private archive against the day somebody asked her what she knew and when she knew it. She put the phone back in her apron and went to help with boarding, and by the time the last passenger was down the aisle, she had forgotten she had done it. In 18C on the aisle, a man named Grant Keller was already unhappy. He had been unhappy at the gate, and he carried it on board with him. When Marcus stowed the carry-on with the red bag in the overhead directly above their row, Keller made a sound. "That's the whole bin," Keller said to nobody. "One bag, the whole bin," Marcus said. "I can move it back a row if that helps." "It's fine." Keller opened his laptop. "It's fine. Everybody's got attitude today." Marcus edged past him into the middle seat and sat down. Nia looked at her father with the specific expression of a child registering an injustice he has decided to let go, and Marcus shook his head very slightly, and she let it go too. The door closed on time. They were 40 minutes out of Atlanta and in moderate chop when the man across the aisle in 17D opened a foil pouch of cashew clusters. Marcus saw it. He was already reaching for the flight attendant call button when the aircraft dropped and a small confetti of crumbs came off the tray table in 17D and landed on Nia's. It took perhaps 2 minutes. "My throat itches," Nia said. Marcus turned. There was color coming up around her mouth, a bloom of red at the corners, faint and then not faint. "Nia, look at me." She coughed a short, dry sound with nothing behind it. She rubbed at her neck with the flat of her hand, which was a thing she did not do. And she said the sentence Marcus had been listening for since the day she was diagnosed. "My tongue feels thicker." He pressed the call button. Above him, a soft chime sounded in the forward galley and a light went on. And somewhere in the aircraft's maintenance system, a line of code recorded a seat number and a time. Because that system was built to notice when a button was pressed too many times and might be failing. Nobody came. The seatbelt sign was on. The crew was securing the carts before the next band of turbulence. Claire was in the forward galley with the tablet in her hand and a supervisor's voice from the ground still in her ear about service flow, and the chime was one sound among a great many sounds. Marcus pressed the button again. 41 seconds after the first. The system recorded that too. He waited 11 more seconds. Then he unbuckled his belt. He stood, and Grant Keller pulled his knees back with visible irritation to let him out, and Marcus stepped into the aisle with his hand on the seat back and reached up for the bin. Claire came out of the galley fast. "Sir, sit down. The sign is on." "My daughter is having an allergic reaction." Marcus did not raise his voice. He had been trained a long time ago and in another life to speak in emergencies the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge. "I need the red bag. It's right here, 10 seconds. "Sir, I need you in your seat. Look at her." He did not point. He kept both hands visible, one on the seat back, one at his side. "Row 18 window, look at her face." Claire did not look at row 18 window. What she looked at was a man over 6 feet standing in her aisle during turbulence with the sign illuminated, and what she heard from the aisle seat of his own row was Grant Keller saying, "He's been aggressive since we boarded." Later, a great many people would want Claire to have felt hatred in that moment because hatred is legible and can be condemned and set aside. She did not feel hatred. She felt certainty. She felt the write-up in her personnel file and the ground supervisor's voice, and 17 years of reading cabins in 3 seconds, and all of it arrived at once as a single flat fact. This man is not complying, and compliance comes first, and whatever else is happening can be sorted out after. She put her hand on his forearm. Marcus lifted her hand off his arm. He did it the way you move a branch out of a doorway without force and without hurry, and he turned back toward the bin. Claire slapped him. The sound of it was not large. It was a flat crack that most of the cabin did not hear over the engines, and that a few rows heard perfectly. Marcus's head turned about 10 degrees with the impact. "He assaulted a crew member," Claire said loudly to the cabin. "Sir, sit down or I am calling for law enforcement on arrival." 3 rows back, a 17-year-old named Eli Turner had his phone up before he had decided anything. So did 4 other people. That was the reflex now. The phones came out the way hands used to come up. And here is the part that the 18 seconds would never contain. Marcus did not touch his face. A man gets struck in front of 140 people, and the body wants one thing, which is to cover the place where it was struck. Marcus did not do it. His hand never came up. He turned away from Claire completely the way you turn away from weather, and he pulled the bin latch and got the bag down. Inside his head there was no cabin. There was an examination room with a chair by the door, and a woman saying, "There is something wrong with me," and a man with his hands on his knees deciding not to embarrass anyone. He had been given a second chance to be in the room. He was not going to sit down in it. He knelt in the aisle and unzipped the red bag, and behind him Dr. Elena Reyes was already out of 19B. Because she had watched the child in 18A for the last 90 seconds, and she had stopped listening to the argument. Nia's eyes had gone glassy. Her lips were swelling. She was trying to point at her own throat, and her hand did not entirely make it. Then she went down against the window, and the argument in the aisle ended. Reyes took the injector from Marcus's hand, put it against the outside of the girl's thigh, and pressed. She called for oxygen. She told Claire, without softening it, to get the flight deck on the phone and tell them they needed the ground. The captain turned the aircraft toward the nearest suitable field. And in the forward galley with the aircraft descending and a doctor kneeling in row 18, Claire Whitmore opened the incident form on her tablet and began to type. 4 points. Entered while the medical event was still in progress. That the passenger ignored the illuminated seatbelt sign. That he advanced on a crew member in a threatening manner. That he made physical contact. That she acted to protect herself. She hit submit before the wheels touched. The police were waiting at the door. Marcus came up the aisle carrying his daughter, who was breathing, who was conscious, who had her face against his neck. An officer told him to put the child down and bring his hands forward. "She's 9, Marcus said. "She just had anaphylaxis. There's a doctor right behind me who can tell you, 'Sir, put her down.'" He put her down. Elena Reyes took Nia's shoulders. Marcus brought his hands forward, and Nia watched her father get handcuffed in a jet bridge in a city she could not name, and she started screaming. And that was the sound that a number of passengers said afterward they were still hearing weeks later. Claire was walked out through a different door. A company representative met her on the concourse. Her union rep was on the phone within 20 minutes. Somebody brought her water. Marcus was held for questioning for 5 hours. By the next morning, Altura Air had a statement. It said that a passenger failed to comply with safety instructions and made physical contact with a crew member, and that the airline supported its crew. And then the video went out. It was not Eli Turner's. It came from a passenger 4 rows forward who had started recording at the sound of raised voices and posted it within the hour, and it was 18 seconds long, and somebody along the chain had trimmed it well. It opened with Marcus already standing, already large in the frame, already facing Claire down. You could not hear him. The engines took his voice completely, and the phone microphone did the rest. What you could see was a big man refusing to sit, and a woman in uniform, and a slap, and then the clip cut. Millions of people watched it and formed a complete opinion in under 20 seconds, which is roughly how long the whole thing was designed to take. On the 6th day, Altura Air's representatives made an offer. A modest payment, travel vouchers, coverage of the medical bill, a confidentiality clause described as standard 3 paragraphs long, which said that Marcus would not discuss the incident with anyone. He read it at the kitchen table with Nia's discharge paperwork under his elbow. He was going to sign it. That is the honest version. He had a job, a mortgage, a daughter with nightmares, and a face that 40 million strangers had already decided about. And there was a document in front of him that ended the entire thing. Nia came and stood by the chair and looked at the papers for a while. "Dad," she said, "do I have to say sorry to her?" Marcus looked up. His daughter had nearly died in seat 18A, and somewhere in the last 6 days she had worked out that the trouble in her house started with her, and that the correct thing for a child to do when adults are upset is to apologize. He did not answer her. He folded the agreement closed once and put his hand flat on it. The next week, his attorney filed a formal complaint with the Department of Transportation. The complaint produced the response institutions produce when they intend to cooperate slowly. Altura Air was not protecting Claire Whitmore. That was the thing Marcus's attorney explained early, and it took him a while to accept. Because it would have been easier if a company had simply decided to shield one employee. Companies do that, and it can be exposed. What Altura was protecting was the sequence of ordinary decisions that had produced Flight 218, because every one of those decisions was still in use on 400 other aircraft that morning. If Claire had been wrong, then somebody had to explain why a medical alert for a 9-year-old with anaphylaxis rendered on the crew tablet as a symbol 4 millimeters across, indistinguishable at a glance from the symbol for a checked wheelchair. Somebody had to explain why 2 call button presses 41 seconds apart produced no crew response and no logged acknowledgement. Somebody had to explain why a ground supervisor had told the crew, in writing before departure, not to make a cabin-wide food restriction announcement on the grounds that it slowed boarding and the flight was already 3 hours down. And somebody would have to explain why an incident report describing a passenger as a threat had been submitted while a doctor was still kneeling in the aisle. The legal department issued a memo. All crew who had operated 218 were to route inquiries through counsel. It was phrased as a protection for employees, and it functioned as a wall. Maya Brennan received a separate conversation. Her base manager sat across from her in a room with a window onto the tarmac and told her that she was young, that she had a good record, and that the most valuable thing she could offer right now was an accurate memory of procedure. He said the word accurate twice. Maya went home and did not take her phone out of her pocket and did not open her photo library and lay awake, understanding that she had been given an instruction that had never actually been spoken. Marcus's own week went differently, but not better. On the 3rd day, he learned he was on a temporary no-fly list pending review. On the 9th day, the high school where he worked placed him on paid administrative leave, and the principal used the phrase, "until this settles down," and shook his hand, and looked at a point slightly left of his eyes while doing it. What he had not expected was how quickly the argument stopped being about a child. He became a shape people argued over. Devoted father, dangerous passenger, victim of discrimination, trained man who should have known better, threat to a flight crew. Each side built him out of the 18 seconds and defended their construction. Comment sections filled with observations about his height and his build and the way he carried himself. And beneath thousands of words about what kind of man Marcus Reed was, there was almost nothing about what he had actually been doing, which was retrieving medication from a bag 6 feet above his daughter's head. Grant Keller gave one quote to a news site. He said the man had been aggressive since boarding and that he had feared for the safety of everyone on that aircraft. Then he stopped answering messages because he had a business to run, and the story moved past him without ever asking him a second question. Dr. Elena Reyes agreed to give a statement, and the airline's counsel responded by asking politely and in writing whether she had been in a position to observe the entire interaction from row 19 seat B, and whether she could confirm the exact moment her attention had been drawn to row 18. She told Marcus about the letter over the phone. "They're not calling me a liar," she said. "They're establishing that I arrived late. It's the same thing with better manners." It was during that call that Marcus said the thing he had not said out loud to anyone. He said that he had been going back over it, and that he could not stop constructing the version where he sat down, where he complied and waited for a crew member to come at their convenience, and the outcome was whatever it was going to be. And nobody was arrested, and no video existed, and his daughter's face was not on the internet. Reyes did not comfort him. "If you had sat down," she said, "we would be talking about a funeral instead of a lawsuit." Marcus did not answer that. What he could not tell her, and did not tell anyone for another 2 months, was that he had already lived the version where a man sits down and he knew exactly what the conversation sounded like afterward. It sounded like a doctor explaining kindly what the scans showed. and how long they had probably been able to see it, and how these things are difficult to catch early. At home, the shape of the damage was smaller and more specific. Nia stopped sleeping through the night. She would come into the hallway at 2 in the morning and stand there, not crying, just standing, which was worse. She hid the red bag. Marcus found it in the back of the linen closet behind the towels, and he did not say anything about it, and he did not move it, because he understood that she had put it where she could not see it, and that this was for now a form of survival. Then one afternoon, she stopped at the elevator in the medical building where her follow-up appointment was, and she would not go in. It was not a scene. She simply stood outside the doors with her hand around the strap of her backpack and said she wanted the stairs. They took the stairs 4 floors, and neither of them said why. The handprint on Marcus's face was gone within a week. The video of it played roughly 40 million times in the same period, which meant that his cheek healed and the slap did not, and that was the arithmetic of the entire month. On the 12th day, Eli Turner posted 2 minutes and 12 seconds. He was 17, and he had made a decision that cost him something. His original plan, the one he had formed with his thumb hovering over the upload button in an airport hallway with his heart going, had been to post the shocking part because the shocking part was the part people watched. He had sat on the whole file instead for 11 days while his parents received a letter from Altura Air's counsel about the unauthorized distribution of material recorded aboard an aircraft. And then he posted everything he had. The full clip started 90 seconds earlier than the one the world had seen, and it changed the geometry of the entire event. It showed a girl in a window seat scratching at her neck. It showed her cough. It showed her father press the call button, and then a beat later press it again. It showed him waiting with his belt still fastened for the better part of a minute. It showed him stand. It showed Claire Whitmore in the aisle, and it showed her face, and at no point in the entire 2 minutes and 12 seconds did her head turn toward the window seat. It showed Grant Keller's mouth moving from the aisle seat before Marcus had touched anyone. It showed Marcus lift Claire's hand off his forearm, and it was unmistakably the gesture of a man clearing an obstacle rather than confronting a person. It showed the slap. And then it showed the thing the 18-second cut had removed, which was that Marcus never touched his own face, that he turned away from the woman who had just struck him as though she had ceased to exist, and that his next action within a second and a half was to open a bin and kneel in an aisle beside his daughter. The public turned, and it turned hard. Not because of the slap. People had already seen the slap. What silenced them was a man being hit in front of 140 witnesses and not spending a single motion on his own dignity. But the clip did not end the argument. And this is where a great many people expected the story to be over, and it was not. Because you could not hear it. Flight 218 had been in moderate turbulence at cruise thrust. The engine noise sat on top of every human voice in that cabin like a hand over a mouth. On Eli's recording, you could see Marcus's lips moving, and you could see Claire answer him, and you could not make out one word from either of them. So the defense held. Sure, they said he looks calm. But nobody knows what he said to her. You don't know what a man says to a woman in a narrow aisle. She was there. You weren't. Eli sent the original file to a professor in the audio engineering program at the state university because his cousin knew somebody, and the professor called him back and explained what was involved. Separating speech from broadband engine noise at that signal ratio was not a filter you applied in an afternoon. It was weeks of work. And more than that. If the result was ever going to matter anywhere official, it could not simply be a cleaned-up file posted online. It would need an independent examiner to certify that nothing had been added, altered, or synthesized. The professor said 8 weeks minimum, probably more, Eli told Marcus. Then he backed the original file up in 4 separate places because he had begun to understand that he was holding the only unedited record of what had actually been said aboard that aircraft, and that everyone else's copy of the truth was a picture with the sound turned off. Meanwhile, the discovery request produced its first real result, and it was not about Claire at all. The ground supervisor's instruction existed, in writing, time-stamped before pushback. Do not run the restriction announcement. We are already 3 hours down service flow only. Marcus read it twice and then set the page down and looked at the wall of his kitchen for a while. Someone had decided that announcing a food restriction would cost the airline more than not announcing it. That decision had been made by a person who would never learn Nia's name in a building, at a desk with a metric in front of them. And it had traveled down through a crew tablet and a 4mm symbol and a busy galley and arrived in row 18 as a handful of cashew crumbs on a tray table. The fight stopped being Marcus Reed against Claire Whitmore that afternoon. It became Marcus Reed against a system that was in the process of converting an organizational failure into one passenger's behavior, because a passenger can be banned and an organization has to be redesigned. The letter went out on the 26th day. Marcus's attorney sent a formal preservation demand for all cabin video crew communications and system records from Flight 218. He sent it to the corporate contact address published on Altura Air's website, because that was the address published on Altura Air's website. That address routed to Customer Relations. Customer Relations was a department of 19 people handling roughly 400 items a day, and their published service commitment was a response within 10 business days. The letter entered a queue. It was categorized. It waited its turn behind refund disputes and baggage claims and a woman in Cleveland whose wheelchair had been damaged. On the 30th day at some hour of the night that nobody afterward could specify because it did not matter. The cabin video archive for Flight 218 reached the end of its retention cycle and was overwritten. The retention policy was 30 days. It had been written in 2019 and approved by a vice president who had since retired. 30 days was the industry-typical figure, chosen because cabin recordings were understood as an operational and maintenance asset rather than a legal one, and because storage for a fleet that size costs real money, and because in the overwhelming majority of cases nobody ever asks for them. No one pressed a button. No one made a decision. No one was notified. On the 33rd day, Altura Air's legal department received the preservation demand from Customer Relations, appropriately flagged and appropriately escalated, and issued a litigation hold. 2 days late. Marcus's attorney was a plain man who had spent 19 years doing this and had learned not to perform outrage he did not feel. He called Marcus in the evening and explained it in about 90 seconds and then said the only sentence that needed saying. They didn't destroy evidence. They just never had a reason to keep it. That was the part Marcus could not get past for several days afterward. There was no villain in it. There was no meeting where someone shredded something. There was a website address, a queue, a service commitment measured in business days, and a policy from 2019 doing precisely what it had been built to do. And what it had been built to do was forget. There was one thing left, and nobody involved recognized its value for another 2 months, including the airline, which is the only reason it survived. The flight attendant call button did not report to the cabin video system. It reported to the aircraft's maintenance and diagnostics platform, which logged every press by seat and timestamp for the purpose of identifying failing hardware. A switch that starts registering phantom presses a wiring fault in a row, a chime module going bad. That platform was owned by engineering, not by operations, and engineering kept its data for 24 months because a component fault pattern takes that long to see. Nobody had ever thought of it as evidence, which is precisely why nobody had ever thought about it disappearing. The system that would eventually save Marcus Reed had been designed to count mechanical failures, not to protect human beings. It kept its records for 2 years because parts are expensive. The airline's counter arrived 4 days after the video archive was gone, and it was competent. Altura Air released footage from the fixed camera at the aircraft door. It was not cabin video. It was the jet bridge, and it showed Marcus Reed in handcuffs shouting. The audio at the door was clean, and what you heard was a large man yelling, and what you did not hear, because the clip ended 11 seconds before, it was that he was yelling his daughter's name, and that behind him, out of frame, Nia was being loaded onto a gurney by paramedics who would not let him near her. The headline that ran with it on 2 networks and several hundred aggregator sites was this: former military member loses control after violating aviation safety rules. And then his life became public property in a way he had not prepared for. His years as an air evacuation medic, the reason he could read a child's breathing from the movement in her throat. The reason he had known what was happening in seat 18A before his daughter finished her second sentence were described in coverage as combat training. Someone wrote that he had been trained to disable people. That was not what the job had been. The job had been keeping people alive in the back of an aircraft with limited hands and limited light and limited time, which is a description that fits both his old career and what he did in that aisle, but which does not headline as well. Then somebody found the counseling. After Amara died, Marcus had done 6 months of grief and trauma therapy at the recommendation of a physician, because he was raising a 5-year-old alone and had stopped sleeping. It appeared in coverage as a history of psychological instability. A commentator said on air that this raised legitimate questions about whether he should have been in that cabin at all. His separation from the service was described as unexplained. It had been explained at the time and in writing. He had a daughter and no wife and a job that put him on other continents for months. Marcus watched about 40 minutes of this and then stopped watching, and the not watching was its own kind of work. On the 34th day, Claire Whitmore filed a formal complaint alleging unwanted physical contact by a passenger, and Altura Air forwarded it to the prosecutor's office in the city where the aircraft had diverted. On the 38th day, Maya Brennan was suspended pending investigation for sharing internal information. She had not shared anything. What had happened was that a co-worker mentioned in an interview that a junior flight attendant had seen the allergy flag, and the company traced that to Maya, and her system credentials were deactivated the same afternoon. She sat in her car in the employee lot with a badge that no longer opened anything, and she took her phone out, and she looked at a photograph taken at 1942 on the night of the flight, showing a crew tablet, showing a seat map, showing a small blue symbol beside 18A. She had lost access to every system the airline owned. The photograph was on her personal phone and always had been. On the 41st day, Nia withdrew from the finals. She did it herself. She sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop and typed a message to the competition coordinator that was 4 sentences long and extremely polite, and then she took the name badge off her backpack and put it in a drawer. Marcus did not argue with her, because she had spent 6 weeks being described on television as the daughter of a dangerous man, and because standing in front of a room full of strangers had stopped being a good day and become a thing to be survived. What he did not tell her, because there was no point, was that the entry deadline closed that night. The competition ran once a year and had an age bracket. Whatever she did next, it would not be this year and it would not be with these kids. Perhaps the most frightening thing about that flight is not that Claire Whitmore did not know Marcus Reed had once been an air evacuation medic. The frightening thing is what it would mean if that mattered. Because if his training is what makes his words credible, then the standard has quietly become this: an ordinary father saying his child cannot breathe may be ignored, and only the disclosure of some special credential converts him into a person worth checking on. Marcus did not need a heroic past to deserve to be heard. He said his daughter could not breathe. That alone should have been enough. The bottom did not arrive as one blow. It arrived as 3 things landing in the same week. The cabin video was gone permanently, and it had been the only neutral record of the event, the one recording made by no one with a stake in it. Nia had withdrawn, and the year was closed, and Altura Air's counsel filed a motion asking that the subcommittee exclude all material not originating from official airline systems, which was a sentence constructed to mean one thing. Throw out Eli Turner's video. Marcus sat in his kitchen at 2 in the morning with the lights off and the folder open in front of him. He had not read Amara's file in 4 years. He read some of it that night: appointment dates, notes in a physician's shorthand, patient reports, fatigue, weight loss, persistent lumbar pain, discussed stress management, reassurance provided, follow-up as needed. 8 months of that, in different handwriting, in different offices, in the same essential sentence. Nobody in those pages had been cruel. Every one of them had done a reasonable thing on a busy day. And he understood, sitting there, that he was about to lose for exactly the same reason his wife had lost. Not because anyone had decided against them, because at no point in either process had anybody been required to stop and listen all the way to the end of the sentence. On the 60th day, in an apartment in a suburb she had lived in for 11 years, Claire Whitmore watched the 2-minute, 12-second video alone at 11 at night. She had watched it a great many times by then because her attorney had been preparing her testimony, and preparation meant knowing every frame. She had her answer ready. She had rehearsed it until it had the texture of a phrase in a language she did not speak. I felt threatened. Her attorney had asked her something that afternoon in a conference room in the ordinary way of a man building a record. What did he say to you specifically, word for word as best you recall? Claire opened her notebook that night to write it down. She remembered the pressure in her ears when the aircraft dropped. She remembered the tablet warm in her hand and the ground supervisor's voice about service flow. She remembered Grant Keller's face and the exact pitch of his voice from the aisle seat. She remembered the write-up in her file and the phrase failure to maintain cabin readiness. She remembered thinking with total clarity, this man will not sit down. She remembered the shape of Marcus Reed's mouth moving. She did not know what he had said, not because she had forgotten. 60 days is not long enough to forget a sentence you actually heard. She did not know because the sound had arrived at her ears and gone no further the way a page turns past you on a train. She had never heard him. For 17 years, Claire had believed that her particular skill was the ability to read a cabin in 3 seconds. That night, she understood what those 3 seconds had actually been. They were not observation. They were a decision made instantly, followed by the collection of reasons to support it: Keller's voice, the sign, the man's height, the aisle. Everything after the first half-second had been evidence gathering in service of a verdict already entered. She did not withdraw her complaint. She did not call anyone. She did not weep or resolve anything or become a different person, because that is not what happens. She closed the laptop, put the notebook back in the drawer with nothing written in it, and went to bed. The audio lab finished on the 74th day. The professor sent Eli Turner a file and a 12-page technical report, and about a week later, the independent examiner's certification came back, stating in the flat language such documents used that the speech in the processed recording was present in the original and had not been added, altered, or synthesized. On the 88th day, Maya Brennan's attorney submitted a photograph to the subcommittee. There was no dramatic entrance. She did not walk through a door at the last moment with a room turning to look at her. She filed it 30 days ahead of the hearing through counsel, with a declaration attached. Because that is how a person protects herself when she has already been suspended once and understands that the only thing worse than losing a job is losing it in a way nobody can review. She was covered by the federal statute that protects airline employees who report safety violations, a law most crew members have heard of and almost none have used. Her attorney explained it to her the way you explain a parachute: it exists, it works, and using it will not be pleasant. Altura Air had those 30 days to respond, and they used them. Their position was that a photograph of a screen proved nothing about which flight it came from, that crew tablets display many seat maps in a day, and that the image should be excluded as unverifiable. It was a serious argument, and it held for exactly as long as it took someone to lay the photograph's embedded timestamp beside a record from a completely different computer. The hearing convened on the 118th day before a congressional subcommittee on aviation passenger safety, and it was carried live. Before testimony began, the chair denied Altura Air's motion to exclude material not originating from company systems, noting that the recording in question had been independently authenticated and that the airline's own footage was no longer available for comparison. Marcus Reed sat at a long table with a microphone in front of him and his attorney at his shoulder, and he was sworn in, and the airline's counsel began where everyone had known they would begin. Counsel established that the seatbelt sign was illuminated, that the aircraft was in turbulence, that federal regulation requires passengers to comply with crew instructions, that Mr. Reed had unbuckled his restraint and stood. Marcus did not contest any of it. "I broke a safety instruction to keep my daughter from stopping breathing," he said. "What I'm asking this committee to look at is not whether I stood up. It's why I had to stand up after asking for help twice." A member of the subcommittee raised his prior service in the tone of a man offering a compliment and asked whether that background had informed his actions. "My experience told me what was happening," Marcus said. "It let me recognize anaphylaxis before my daughter finished her second sentence. But I don't deserve to be believed more than a father who never wore a uniform. If the only reason my word counts is that I used to do this professionally, then this committee should understand what that means for everybody who didn't. He was asked whether he had anything further, and he did, and the room learned in the next 90 seconds why he had refused a settlement that would have made his life considerably easier. My wife spent 8 months telling people something was wrong with her. She was 34. She was told she was under stress. Nobody in those rooms was cruel to her. Every single one of them was reasonable and busy and reassuring, and by the time anyone actually checked, the only thing left to talk about was how much time she had. I was in those rooms with her. I sat in the chair by the door with my hands on my knees, and I said nothing because I believed the people in the white coats knew better than I did. And because I'd learned that a man like me who pushes gets a label, and a man with a label stops getting help. 4 years later, I stood up on an airplane and said my daughter could not breathe. And I was told to sit down. I'm not here for money. I'm here to ask one question. How many times does a person have to say something is wrong before somebody stops and checks? Claire Whitmore testified after the lunch recess. She had her answer ready and she gave it. She said the sign was on. She said the cabin was in turbulence. She said a passenger seated near row 18 had described the man as aggressive. She said that in the moment standing in a narrow aisle with a passenger who would not return to his seat, she felt threatened. Marcus's attorney had prepared a line of questioning about implicit bias and had gone over it with him twice. Marcus had asked that morning to do it differently. He was permitted to put one question through counsel. It was 11 words long. Before you struck me, what had you heard me say? The room did not fill with noise. It emptied of it. The subcommittee chair looked up from her papers. Somewhere in the back, a camera shutter went off and then stopped. Claire sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her. 4 seconds went by. And on live television, 4 seconds is a considerable amount of time. I don't know, she said. Her counsel rose to object to the form of the question. The chair asked the witness to clarify her answer. Claire leaned toward the microphone and her voice came out lower than it had all afternoon. I don't know, because I wasn't listening to him. She did not cry. She did not apologize from the witness table, which some people afterward held against her, and which was in fact the only correct thing she did that day. She had been asked a factual question under oath, and she had answered it, and the answer was worse than any confession she could have performed. Maya Brennan was sworn in that afternoon and put 3 things on the record. The first was her photograph, a crew tablet, a seat map, a small blue symbol beside 18A, captured at 1942, roughly an hour before the slap. The second was the flight attendant call button log produced under subpoena from Altura Air's maintenance and diagnostics platform, which retained its records for 24 months because component fault patterns take that long to identify. 2 presses from seat 18A, 41 seconds apart. No acknowledgement logged for either. The airline's argument that the photograph might have come from any flight ended there. 2 systems that had never spoken to each other, owned by 2 departments that did not share a budget, agreeing on the same minute. The third was the ground supervisor's written instruction time-stamped before pushback. Do not run the restriction announcement service, flow only. Captain Dalton, who had been flying for 26 years and who had said almost nothing publicly, confirmed under oath that he was not informed of a medical situation in the cabin until after the physical contact between his purser and a passenger, and that when he was informed, he began a diversion within 90 seconds. Dr. Elena Reyes confirmed that the presentation she observed was consistent with progressing anaphylaxis, that the epinephrine had been administered from the passenger's own bag, and that the father's actions had been clinically appropriate throughout. Then Marcus's attorney entered one more item into the record, a second epinephrine auto-injector, unused, still sealed with a lot number and an expiration date. The one Marcus had carried onto that aircraft alongside the one his daughter received. It proved nothing about the slap. It established in an object anyone could hold that the man Altura Air had described as a threat to a flight crew had boarded that airplane more prepared for a medical emergency than the airline was. Then Eli Turner's certified audio was played into the room. For the first time, the people who had watched that video 40 million times heard what had been under the engines the entire time. Marcus's voice 3 times at increasing volume and unchanging pitch. My daughter can't breathe. And Claire's answer clear enough that no one would ever be able to argue about the wording again. I don't care, sit down now. Then a child coughing. Then the slap, which on a clean recording was a small sound much smaller than the imagination had made it. Then Marcus's voice again, no louder than before, saying Nia's name. And at the end, Elena Reyes from row 19 saying the sentence she had said in the aisle that day and had never once repeated to a reporter. 2 more minutes and we might have lost her. The hearing room went completely silent, exactly as the cabin of Flight 218 had gone silent 118 days earlier. But the silences were not the same. The first one came from 140 people who did not know what to do. This one came from a room in which no one could any longer say they did not know what had happened. The assault complaint against Marcus Reed was declined by the prosecutor's office in a 2-sentence letter. The temporary flight ban was lifted. Maya Brennan was reinstated with back pay and formally recognized as a protected whistleblower. Claire Whitmore's original incident report was determined to be materially inaccurate and to have been submitted while a medical emergency was ongoing. 2 managers in ground operations were suspended pending review of the departure time directives they had issued. Altura Air issued a public apology and commissioned an independent review of its medical alert and cabin escalation procedures. Claire's employment was terminated. She found Marcus in the corridor outside the hearing room afterward, near a window while his attorney was still packing documents. She was not with counsel. Nobody had arranged it. The apology she gave him was 4 sentences long. There were no tears in it and no explanation attached to it. And she did not use the word threatened or the word procedure or the word sorry more than once. Marcus did not tell her that it was all right because it was not, and he did not tell her that he forgave her because on that afternoon he did not. "You can't change what happened to my daughter," he said. "You can keep yourself from doing it to the next person." Then he walked back down the corridor, and Claire stood by the window, and that was everything she received. What Marcus asked Altura Air for in the negotiated settlement that followed was not money. He asked that medical alerts render at full size on crew devices and never be reducible to an icon. He asked that a call button press from a seat carrying a medical flag be routed as a priority signal that required an acknowledgement. He asked that crew be trained to rule out a medical emergency before classifying a passenger as non-compliant. He asked that incident data be placed under an automatic preservation lock the moment any complaint was received by any department, through any channel so that no future record would depend on whether a letter reached the right inbox. He asked for training in implicit bias de-escalation and listening. And he asked for protection for employees who report. The 4th item was the one he added himself against his attorney's advice, because it had no benefit to his case whatsoever. The cabin video of Flight 218 was gone, and no rule written afterward could bring it back. It would not save him. It would only save whoever came next. 6 months later, Altura Air rolled out a revised cabin escalation procedure. Before a passenger could be classified as non-compliant, 2 questions were now required. Is this a medical situation? What do you need? The opening module of the new training was called 2 minutes. It taught crews what can be observed asked, and established in the interval that had elapsed between a slap and a 9-year-old losing consciousness, and it opened with the timestamps from a call button log rather than with any video at all. Marcus taught at a handful of those sessions and then declined to do more. The airline's communications department had ideas about him. He understood what those ideas were worth, and he was not going to let what happened to his daughter be turned into somebody's campaign. Nia still does not ride elevators. After 11 months of therapy, she can go in if her father is with her and if someone holds the door open by hand. Alone, she will not. It is possible she never will. In the Reed house, this is not discussed as a problem. It is discussed as taking the stairs, and both of them take the stairs, and that is the arrangement. She lost the year. The finals had closed the night she withdrew, and the competition ran once annually with age brackets. So when she finally stood in front of a room again, she did it 12 months late in a different division without the kids she had wanted to meet. Marcus went back to the school. It was not the same place. While he was on leave, a group of parents had signed a petition asking that he not be reinstated. The district never showed him the names, and he never asked. He did not need the list. He learned it in the parking lot and in the hallway by the gym, in the way certain conversations stopped when he came around a corner and started again after he passed. He teaches anyway. He is good at it. He simply stopped believing the building entirely belonged to him. Grant Keller still flies business class most weeks. No one ever asked him a second question. It is likely he no longer remembers Marcus Reed's name. Claire Whitmore entered a restorative accountability program. She was not reinstated anywhere and did not apply to be. The story does not ask anyone to pity her. It only notes that a person gets a chance to change on the day she stops calling herself the victim of consequences she caused. Eli Turner learned something he did not expect at 17. Holding up a phone does not make a person a witness. Responsibility starts when you protect the whole context instead of posting the part that travels fastest. Nia finished the device. It clips to a lanyard. It is about the size of a deck of cards, and it has a red light on the front that is deliberately, stubbornly too large. It cannot be minimized. It cannot be rendered as a symbol 4 millimeters across on a screen full of other symbols. It blinks until a human being presses the button and confirms they have looked. She named it Listen First. On the display table beside it, she set the red medical bag and the paper airplane flattened out and smoothed with the flat of her hand, its creases permanent. Next to those, she set 2 small lights, side by side unlabeled for the 2 times her father pressed a button and nobody answered. And a printed card that read 2 minutes is a very short time until someone cannot breathe. A younger contestant near the end of the row was shaking so badly she could not get her opening line out. Nia went over and took her hand. "Look at me and breathe with me." At the back of the room, Marcus stood very still and heard his wife's voice come out of his daughter. A year after the hearing, Marcus and Nia boarded another aircraft. The red bag went under the seat in front of him within reach where he could put a hand on it without standing. Nia was not comfortable. When the cabin door swung shut and sealed, she took her father's hand and held it hard all the way through taxi and rotation until the wheels came off the runway. Marcus said nothing about it. He simply left his hand where it was. 2 rows ahead, an older man put a fist against his chest and started to push himself up out of his seat. A young flight attendant came down the aisle. She did not tell him to sit. She went down on one knee beside him, level with his eyes, close enough that he did not have to raise his voice over the engines. "What do you need?" The cabin went quiet to hear the answer. Nia looked over at her father. Marcus did not say anything. He just nodded once. She took the paper airplane out of her backpack, pressed the wings back into shape along creases that would never lie flat again, and set it on the tray table in front of her. This time, the silence in that cabin was not made of fear or shame or judgment. They were quiet because they were listening. A person should not have to prove they are exceptional to be treated decently. Sometimes the only thing standing between a mistake and a tragedy is a few seconds of calm, long enough to look to ask, and to hear the end of the sentence. And sometimes, even after the truth is finally said out loud, there are things that do not come back. That is exactly why those few seconds matter so much. They are cheaper than everything that follows.